Hi class, so this is another pre-recorded discussion of Module 6. So the topic on this module is basically inflation rate. So what are we trying to discuss on this module? Number one, we are trying to discuss what is inflation rate. And number two, and how do we measure inflation? And number two is dollars in actual or in constant dollars. So I'll proceed to the discussion on the module. So anyway, what's inflation? Inflation refers to the increase in the prices of goods and services over time. It's an economic term that means you have to spend more to fill your gas tank. Inflation increases the cost of living, and inflation reduces the purchasing power of each unit of currency. No? So what might be you are purchasing right now, you cannot purchase it next year at the same price. And then, according to Investopedia, inflation is the quantitative measure of the rate at which the average price level of a basket of selected goods and services in an economy increases over a period of time. It is the constant rise in the general level of prices where a unit of currency buys less than it did in the prior periods. Often expressed as a percentage, inflation indicates a decrease in the purchasing power of a nation's currency. So what basically is inflation? Inflation, based on the previous slides, we have assumed that prices remain relatively unchanged. And this supplementary discussion, we will define and quantify the loss of purchasing power or inflation. So as you can see in the example, this is the inflation rates for the Philippine economy for the past few years. So this is the inflation rate for 2017. So also, when it comes to other nations, a basic example would be Venezuela, because the inflation of Venezuela spiked up to 1.3 million%. Say from 2012 up to the 2018, that is the very reason when you go into Venezuela, even you, the value of your money is to around 1 million peso, you can only buy a single drink for that money. So inflation is a loss in purchasing power of money over time. Okay? So in other way, the same dollar amount buys less of an item over time. And then the other term, or the opposite term of inflation, is what we call as deflation. It refers to a decrease in price over time, and hence a specified dollar amount gains purchasing power rate. So as you can see that there is still a potential increase in purchasing power if there is a deflation. So what is consumer price index? Consumer price index is that consumers usually have a relative and imprecise sense of how their purchasing power is declining based on their experience of shopping for food, clothing, transportation, and housing over the years. So when you say kung ikaw ang consumer, you are trying to be the one purchasing the materials or supplies, that is what we call as the consumer price index. So economists develop a measure of called CPI, which is based on a typical market basket of goods and services required by the average consumer. So it is a good measure of the general price increase of the consumer product. So, but it is not a good measure of industrial price practices, because basically the industry pricing in terms of materials are different compared to consumer prices. So, in that point, you can actually refer to, kung ingon kag business, that will be referred to as a PPI. So, there are 8 major baskets when it comes to consumer goods. Number 1 is food and alcoholic beverage. Number 2 is housing. Number 3 is apparel. Number 4 is transportation, medical care, entertainment, personal care, and other goods and services. So as you can see, it can be defined which is essential and non-essential. No? So what is PPI? PPI is a price index that measures the average changes in prices received by domestic producers for their output. So that refers to the amount by the producer. So this is an example of CPI and PPI. No? So when you say consumer price index, this is the inflation. And then when it comes to the PPI, that refers to another set of data. So there are basically different ways in computing on inflation. Number one is the average inflation rate. So it is an account that has a varying inflation rates. We can compute for a single inflation rate called the average inflation rate. Okay. Sample problem is if the base price of a commodity is around $100 at the year 2000 and inflation rate is 2000 at 4% and 8% for 2021. What is the price of the commodity at the end of 2 years and what is the average inflation rate? So, in other terms, let's solve first for number 1 or let's try to solve first on number 1. What is the price of the commodity at the end of the 2 years? So, for example, you have your year 2020, 2000 that is equivalent to $100. Your inflation on 2000 that is 4% and your inflation at 2001 that is 8%. So, the value of your commodity on 2001 would be, on year 2001, that would be 100 multiplied by 1 plus 0.04 to the exponent of 1. Therefore, at the end of its first year, that is 100 times 1.04, that is around $104. And since on the second year, the inflation rate is around 8%, so on the year 2002, your 104 will gain an additional inflation. No? So that is 1.08 to the exponent of 1. Okay, so that is $112.32. In other terms, the value of your commodity at the end of 2 years is around 112.32. So the second problem is what is the average inflation? So in other terms, we have the formula for a future value is equal to P 1 plus I to the exponent of N. Assuming that the future value is already 112.32, is equal to 100, 1 plus I to the exponent of 2, that is for 2 years. So upon getting the solution, you can solve for I, and the answer would be how much? 5.98%. So therefore, the average inflation rate for the 2 years is around 5.98. Okay, that means that you can actually solve it the other way around, but this is the basic formula for getting the average inflation rate. So general inflation rate, what does that mean? So this average is calculated in basis of CPI for all items in the market basket. So CPI N is equal to CPI 0, or what we call as on the specific year 1 plus f to the exponent of n. Therefore, f is equal to CPIN over CPI0 to the exponent of 1 over n minus 1. Still, as you can see, this is what we call as your future value. This is your present value. 1 plus f is your I, is your inflation rate is f, no? And then to the exponent on pila na siya ka years ni expound or ni compound. Therefore, CPI is the consumer price index at the end of period N, and CP0 is the consumer price index for the base period that we are looking into. So, for example, if we have a CPI for 2 consecutive years, we do not need to solve for the other computation because there is another formula for that one. That refers to CPI of n minus the CPI of n minus 1 over the CPI of n minus 1. Example problems are number 1. Calculate the general inflation rate for 2011 where CPI for 2010 is 218 and CPI for 2011 is 223.50. So by formula, it would tell you that f of n is equal to CPIN minus CPIN minus 1 divided by CPI of n minus 1. By substituting your given, your inflation rate or the CPIN is for 2011, that would be around 223.50 minus 218 over 218. Therefore, it will give you a general inflation rate of 2.52%. Okay. So, here is an example if it's not a consecutive number of years. So, what would be the general inflation rate for a 30,000 earned in 1995? The CPIs for the 2 years are for 1995 is 152.4 and for 2011 is 223.47. Therefore, we can copy your formula. F or inflation is equal to CPI of n over CPI of 0, 1 over n minus 1. Okay? That is derived from the future value of a present amount at certain interest rate. So if you look at it, we are trying to look into what is the number of years. No? So 2011 minus 1995, that is 16 years. Now, we already know that inflation, or we can already know, or we can already substitute the given on the solution, wherein your CPM is 223.47 divided by your CP0 or base period, which is 1995 at 152.40 to the exponent of 1 over 16 minus 1. Therefore, the general inflation rate is equivalent to 223 is equivalent to 2.42%. So, we now know that the general inflation rate is 2.42% per year, basing on the CPIs. So when we say about specific inflation rate, so kung makita ninyo ganiha when it comes to 2 consecutive years, the same formula applies, no? So the same formula applies, no? But for ganina man good, we are looking into the CPI. Karon we are looking into specific segments of the market. Ano siya na siya itawag na segment J. So that is basically the formula is CPN is equal to CP0 1 plus f of j to the exponent of n. So this is exponent of n. Therefore, kumingon tao when it comes to computing your kuan, number one, what is the specific inflation rate for each period? The average inflation rate for the over 6 years and calculate the general inflation rate. So, mana itong pangitao. No? So, number one, we look into kanisang letter B because basically that is F is equal to P 1 plus I to the exponent of n, where in your future value of the commodity or the certain segment is 339.01 is equal to the present amount of 276.24 1 plus I to the exponent of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Therefore, your inflation rate for a certain segment sa market nimo that is 3. That is around 3.47%. So ang imuhang average inflation rate for over the 6 years, that is equivalent to 3.47%. Now, let's solve for specific inflation rate. So kumingon tag specific inflation rate, what is your inflation rate for the first pila ka years? So say for example on the rate on first year, so that is 287.84. So F is equal to P 1 plus I to the exponent of n. So F is 287.84 equals to 276.24 1 plus I to the exponent of 1. Therefore, the answer for this one would be 4.199%. Okay? And then, succeedingly, you follow through the same equations. No? That is wait, F is 313.83 divided by 287.84 minus 1, that is F. 313.83 divided by 287.84. This is 9.02%. This is 2.19%. This is 1.79%. This is 2.55%. This is 1.26%. So that is what we call as our specific inflation rates. No? So that is 9.03, 2.19, 1.79, 2.55, and 1.26. So kumingon tag when it comes to inflation rate, basically we have two formulas. You can use this one or you can use the other one using katungganihan sa general inflation rate, which comes from 287.84 minus 276.24 over 276.24. It will give you basically the same answer. But to lessen the confusion, you can actually go by the formula using this one. Next. So I'm already able to check this one. So to continue with the third question, which is what is the inflation or general inflation rate, assuming we are not provided the general inflation rate sa 1995. So say for example, we are given the 2011 and 1982 na CPI. So therefore, we can already compute for the general inflation rate, which is equal to 223.50 divided by 96.50 to the exponent of 2011 minus 1982, that is 29 years. So that is 1 over 29 minus 1. So therefore, your 223.50 divided by 96.50 to the exponent of 1 divided by 29 minus 1. That means that is around 2.93% general inflation rate. So, one lang, when it comes to general inflation rate, the basic requirement for that one is the CPI. Okay? Okay? But when it comes to specific inflation rate and average inflation rate, you can use for the actual cost of the price or the value of the commodities. So actual and versus constant dollars. So when we say actual or current dollars or AN, that refers to our estimates of future cash flow for the year end that takes into account any anticipated changes in the amount caused by inflationary or deflationary effect. So in other terms, kung yung actual, that refers to considering inflation or the compound na siya. And number two, when we say about constant dollars or A still AN hat. So it reflects constant purchasing power independent of the passage of time. So it is a measure of worth, not an indicator of the number of dollars paid or received. So that is what we call as regardless of inflation. No? So there is no inflation with regards to that one. Say for example, you have a certain problem still, what would be your 30,000 earned in 1995 be equal to 2011? So the CPIs for the 2 years are 152 and 223 respectively. So as we all know, since we are not provided any inflation rate with regards to specifics, and we are provided with CPIs. Therefore, we can compute for the general inflation rate. So the general inflation rate is equal to 223.47 minus 152.40 over, so that is 223.47 divided by 152.40 to the exponent of how many years is it considered? So 2011 minus 1995. That is 16 years. So that is 1 over 16 minus 1. Therefore, your general inflation rate is equal to 2.42%. I'll store the value in my calculator since that is not the one dyan. This is a rounded off equation. So you have to store your value. So therefore, if you're looking for the actual conversion, you have the constant dollar of 30. What is its actual in terms on the year 2011? No? So knowing that you have f is equal to p 1 plus I to the exponent of n, therefore your f or the future value of the 30,000 earned in 1995, 1 plus f, this one, to the exponent of 16 years. Therefore, your equivalent value in actual dollars ano niya is 990.60. Okay. So since the constant and kuan ang imong actual ano niya in terms of the value of 2011 is kana na siya 43,990.60. So actually ang difference ra na niya, your given would be what you call as your either your present or your future. Okay? And then actual to constant conversion. So at 8% average inflation rate, 1,260 actual dollars, what is the equivalent purchasing it has 3 years from now? No? Okay? So, what is iyahang kuan in the end of 3 years from now? So, if you have an average inflation rate or F of 8%, so kung mayroon ta, pila naman lang na imong purchasing value or pila naman lang imong purchasing value sa imong 1,260 no, in 3 years from now. So assuming that you have 1,260 na imuhang cash karon and you have an inflation rate of 1.08 to the exponent of 3. No? What is its actual in terms of value in the next 3 years? So therefore, your equation would be equals to 1,260 divided by 1.08 to the exponent of 3. That is your actual to constant since that is so that is the purchasing value na lang niya no at the end of 4 years kay imong inflation mo kagamay man imong purchasing power. So therefore your A hat N is 1,260 divided by that is 1. 23. So what does this mean? So its equivalent purchasing power will be smaller in the next 3 years because of inflation. Therefore, your 1,260 is equivalent to 1,000.23. Okay? And then comparing your on the problem number 1, you're actually knowing what is the amount, no, including your inflation if you if you are able to compute or the actual dollars, no? And therefore you have to remember that kumingon tag actual dollars, this is inflation and this is for constant dollars, that is regardless of inflation. So this sums up the whole engineering economics na syllabus and the modules wherein you are able to understand nearly the first 6 modules or the 6 modules of engineering economics, and hopefully you are able to understand clearly all of the topics at hand. And thank you.